Good morning. I'm Dave McCormick, the Label and Packaging Group Director for Printing Industries Association of Southern California. And we're having our program today on cybersecurity. But before we start, I'd like to just mention a couple of things. I'd like to remind you that membership doesn't cost you, it pays. I have found that many of our members are not using our discount for our different services. So I'd like just to remind you that just by using one or two of these discount services can cover or exceed the cost of your membership. So if you're not taking part of any of our discounts, please get in touch with Maribel at our main office. She's at extension 210, and she can get you started. And again, these discounts actually save you money and pay for your membership dues. So besides that, I'd like to introduce you to our presenter for today's webinar, Brian Inina. He is the president and co-founder of Strategic Systems Group of Los Angeles-based information technology consulting firm. He is active in the Southern California chapter of the International Association of Microsoft Channel Partners and the Microsoft Community Connection Program. Brian has presented on a new number of technical topics in the South Bay Chamber of Commerce and in Orange County chapter of SCORE. Please welcome Brian to our seminar. Go ahead, Brian.
Benjamin Franklin is once quoted as saying, "Without continual growth, progress, such words as improvement, achievement, and success have no meaning." Thank you, Dave, for the great introduction, and thank you all for being here. I know that your time is valuable, and we'll try and make this as valuable as possible for you. My name is Brian Inuma. My company is Strategic Systems Group. We're a Los Angeles-based IT consulting firm and experts in enterprise resource planning. We help manufacturing and distribution companies, say about 25 million to 150 million in revenue, who are frustrated by the lack or insufficient resources in their internal IT departments, who are upset by an implementation that may not have gone so well with another partner, and who are under pressure to allocate too few resources to too many IT issues. And maybe lastly, who are concerned about the return on investment of their ERP applications. My co-presenter and I, Eddie Bader, we are part of the Microsoft Community Connections team, the charter of which is to present technology topics to provide education and thought leadership to chambers of commerce and business associations. And with that, I'd like to introduce Eddie Bader.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I appreciate that. As Brian mentioned, my name is Eddie, and I work with Company Built. We provide technology solutions for business, and we specialize in security and backup and disaster recovery, but we also look at businesses from a complete perspective. So even though we are technology-driven, we are businessmen at heart, and we always think about what's best for the business. And so that's our slant on things. I'm looking forward to sharing this topic with you, and with that, I'm going to pass it back to Brian.
Okay. Thank you, Eddie. Eddie also has one thing that I'll give you a little bit of a prelude to. He has a gift that he would like to offer toward the end of our presentation. Let's start with the agenda for today. We'll do a little bit of introduction and background as we just did. There's a section here about mitigating risk, and then I think what will be kind of interesting for us is a Q&A and panel discussion that we'll have toward the end of our presentation. One of the things that has come up in discussion quite a lot is this notion of cybercrime. And the issue is prevalent, and it's sort of discouraging how often it comes up in the news. Cybercrime has a number of facets. It can be part of a hack to an individual computer or part of a network, which sometimes is more invasive. the computer can be used in the commission of a crime, or it may actually be the target. And we've had some situations where computers or devices have been taken over. And the owners unknowingly have been part of that attack. So here's some statistics. So on average, there's a 34% increase in financial losses at 2.7 million reported by businesses in 2014 due to security incidents. And then Eddie has a couple of examples that are even more recent than that are just mind-boggling in terms of the size. In terms of an average cyber attack cost, back in 2014, it was a little over $20,000. And unfortunately, the 40% of businesses hit by a cybercrime close within 6 months. And this is especially true in situations where it's a small or medium-sized business. Large organizations sometimes have the financial wherewithal to survive something like this, or they have some insurance to protect them. So the difficult part is that as a small business owner, you have legal and privacy obligations. State and federal regulators have stepped up the efforts so that companies can properly handle data breach responses, and the fines are sometimes staggering. So there's a slide here about some recent data breaches, and everybody probably remembers the Target breach, which was quite large. And that breach was kind of a strange sort of thing. It wasn't so much an attack from the outside, but maybe an attack from the inside, if you will. And kind of oddly, it was the HVAC system that was the source of the breach. So the HVAC system had access to the network and the POS devices and was able to capture that information and send it out to the bad guys. Eddie has another one that is even more recent, so go ahead, Eddie.
Sure, thanks, Brian. I also want to mention something about the Target case. When we think about the Target case, we think about that as a single crime, but it was actually two sets. If you remember from the slide we just looked at, the computer could be the target, or it could be a means to get to the target. So two things happened in the Target situation is the third-party HVAC company that had contracted with Target, their computers were the target, because through those computers, those machines were used as access points into the Target system. So Target was the ultimate goal, that was the ultimate prize, but those are really two different cyber attacks, and one was conducive to getting to the other. So it's important to look at it that way. The other one I wanted to talk to you about was, I just read yesterday about the Verizon-Yahoo deal. If you remember that Yahoo disclosed that they had been hacked, and that was back in September, and they had 2 additional disclosures in December of last year. It looks like the purchasing price for that deal was negotiated down by $350 million because of those attacks. So Verizon took back $350 million out of that deal, plus because Yahoo didn't have any cybersecurity insurance, Yahoo is going to have to absorb all the lawsuits stemming from shareholder lawsuits and SEC investigations. So the costs and the fines keep piling up, but and these are the types of cases and scenarios that we often hear about, we read in the paper and see in the news, but smaller level, less dollar amounts, more frequent attacks, these things happen to small, medium-sized businesses all the time. They may not make the paper, but they're just as prevalent, and they might not be in the neighborhood of $350 million, but in proportion to the businesses that they affect, they're very damaging.
Great, thanks. Small business is a prime target, and the reason why is that the situation is such where large organizations have done a pretty good job of putting things together as a security block. Oftentimes it starts off with firewall, but also it's important to have internal aspects of security strengthened as well. And unfortunately, small businesses don't necessarily have the same kind of resources that large ones do. But there are some things that small businesses can still do to protect themselves. Security by obscurity and denial is no longer an option. So it's not acceptable to sort of kind of pretend the problem is not there. Criminals know that small and medium-sized businesses believe they are safe or will take their chances. And I think that there's this sort of false sense of security by being small. No one will notice me kind of deal. Is often denial, or IT is often in denial about the situation, and budgets are often stretched in IT departments in small businesses. And then, more importantly, the executives do not pay enough attention to the threats. So the larger question is, what do businesses, and especially small and medium-sized businesses, do to plan for security? And at this point, I'll let Eddie take over the presentation.
Thanks, Brian. So when we talk about business owners and their obligation to protect their data, we're really talking about three things. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability. When we talk about confidentiality, you have an obligation as a business owner to protect data from outside sources. So if you are dealing with client data or you're dealing with human resource data, all that information is private and it needs to be secured and kept confidential. That's not only for external people but also for internal people. So an example of that might be that if I'm working in sales and marketing, I really shouldn't have any access to human resource records. And again, human resources probably shouldn't have access to financial records. So a lot of this is just common sense, but it's important to remember that there is an obligation to keep the data secure, not only from external sources, but segregate that information within your company as well. Integrity, the next obligation is that we ensure that all the information that we have is accurate and does not get altered in any way that could be damaging to either the company or the individuals that that information belongs to. So that's really important. Sometimes information can get hacked, which means a couple of things. It can either be taken or it can be altered, and both have devastating effects. If it's altered to a certain extent, that could impact individuals or other businesses. And lastly is availability. The availability of information and data within the company, access to your financials, to human resource records, to employee social security numbers or health records, if you should have those kinds of needs within your company, that needs to be available at any given time, on demand essentially, to ensure that you need to set up your environment so that it's protected from outside intrusion, but also do enough, set up enough processes to make sure that that data, it could be redundancy, like the data is stored in 2 different places, but just ensure that's available whenever you need it or whenever it's requested. So planning is a wonderful thing, but the plans usually, oops, apologize, went a little too far there. Most important thing here is you need to have a plan before it happens. So hopefully right now none of you have been breached, although statistics show that it probably has happened or will happen very soon. And I don't mean to be a bearer of bad news, but that's just the reality of the situation. So it's important that you plan ahead and understand how you're going to handle a situation, whether you identified a breach or if you just think that you may have been breached. So when we talk about this, we talk about a timely and proper breach response. Each division or each segment of your company should have a plan on how to deal with compromised situations, compromised network, compromised data. The people in finance are going to do something differently than the people in human resources are. The communications that go out will be different. But all those individual segments need to be guided by an overarching plan. So that's important. And again, need for processes and procedures. This is, I will tell you that there is no magic bullet in technology. There's no one thing that will save you from anything, but it's a layered approach, and part of that approach is having conversations with your people. So the ultimate weapon is having policies and procedures, along with training people and then implementing the best technology to actually protect your company and its data. And again, and that kind of leads into the last thing, which is ensure all employees understand their business obligations. And this is something that can be set forth in an Internet and Technology Use Policy. If your company doesn't have one, I strongly suggest that you consider drafting one and ensuring that every associate signs it. And then this is also something that you're going to want to review periodically. Pardon me. Usually quarterly would be good, or at least twice a year, because the threats to business change quite frequently, and you want to make sure that this policy is always as up-to-date as possible. So as your business changes, you should always go back to this Internet and Technology Use Policy and decide whether or not changes are required there as well. So this is seems like a big task, but if you break it into smaller steps, this can be really easy, and you can have different people responsible for different parts of this task. Excuse me. So you want to make sure you inventory, classify, and document your assets, your services and support. You want to know what you have as far as systems go, what you have as far as data goes, your facilities, because remember that security, especially with computers and things, is not limited to the cyber world or the network activity, but it's also physical security. So if you're in an office and you have your file server in a room, that room should remain locked, and the access to that room should be extremely limited, preferably to only to those individuals who actually need to access that room or allow access to that room. So if you have a server room that has an open door. So back to this, we talked about the facilities and making sure that your server room is locked. I'm hoping you heard that part. If you didn't, I'll just go back real quick. If you have a server room that's in your office, that door needs to be locked and access needs to be minimal. So only who needs access to it, or who is responsible for granting access to that room, should actually have a key to that locked door. And as far as people, I kind of touched on this before. It's really important to understand the roles and responsibilities of each individual and exactly what access they need to certain data. I can guarantee you that there's just a few people that might need access to everything, but that depends on how your company's set up. So Brian, if you wouldn't mind moving to the next slide. So when we inventory and classify all systems, we're going to determine which systems are critical and contain the most sensitive data. So depending on the size of your company, this might all be on one server, and that's totally fine, but it's important to know where all the information is and, again, who has access to it. It would be great to assign a responsibility to an individual to keep track of this information, understand how much data is being used, understand how it's being accessed, and really, if you have turnover in your business, make sure that old credentials are removed from the network as soon as possible, so that nobody has the opportunity to come in and get sensitive data using old credentials. It's great to also document a baseline for configuration in case you have to do a bare metal restore. And what I mean by a bare metal restore is that if all your systems crashed and you had to go out and buy new computers, they basically have nothing on them that you've been using to run your business, however long you've been running your business. So you'd have to restore all your applications, whether they be like Office or proprietary applications that you use to run your business, or maybe it's an application you use to run your machines in the office or in the shop floor or wherever you have computers. But you also need to get all those things on those computers and all those all that data back on those systems. So you want to have, you don't want to be figuring that out as you go, and maybe you remember everything and maybe you don't. So it's a good idea to document that baseline and keep that document updated. Identify critical vendors and support in case there is a breach or you need an outside resource to help get you back up and running in case of a loss or an unplanned event. It's important to have those numbers handy and in a place that's probably not on your computer so you can access that in case your computers go down. And again, this is similar to systems. You want to determine where all your data is, and we're talking about whether it's in the office or outside the office. If you allow your associates to have data on their mobile devices, if they have mobile devices, information that they can take home, you're going to want to make sure that you're protecting that and making sure that that doesn't walk away. There are solutions that allow you to remotely wipe devices in the case of a device getting lost, stolen, or an associate decides to quit or is let go, and they don't return their device either in a timely manner or at all. You can actually remotely wipe that data so that you are less exposed. Identifies who's responsible for protecting this data. Again, my personal opinion is that everybody's responsible, but you should assign at least one person to be the point and have that person kind of manage that process. Again, documenting access and permission, that's kind of a standard. If you have an IT group, or if you have a single person running your IT for your company, that person should probably be the one to document these things. But I would say that as the owner or as a manager, you want to make sure you have access to that and are reviewing that periodically, because the decisions on access should not necessarily be made by the IT person. They should be made by the operations person, because they have a bigger picture of the whole company. And then learn to protect any shadow IT processes and data. And when we talk about shadow IT, what that means is the things that you don't know about. So let's say if we have a company and my standard issue is Office 365, Internet Explorer for your browser, and our accounting package, and you either have access to that or you don't. What you'll find is your associates will, and again, depending on your policy, if you don't have one, then you've never set the ground rules for them, but they might have added Pandora or Facebook or other things to their machines or their mobile devices that you are unaware of. All of those extra applications, all of those extra devices, those are the things that compromise shadow IT, and those are things that could potentially make your company vulnerable to data loss and to breaches. Excuse me. And then one of the most important things that I think in the whole process are the people. So we need to develop individual habits. You can start with something simple like passwords, setting a certain minimum length, and make sure that these are changed frequently. Oftentimes when I come into an office environment, I'll see post-it notes on the monitor with their passwords on it, or in the super secret hiding place under the keyboard that nobody would ever dare to look to find those passwords. Sometimes you can find them there if you're willing to lift up that keyboard. And I kind of joke when I say that, but it's true. I would probably say there's not one office that I've ever been into that at least one employee didn't have their password open and available for somebody to look at and potentially access. And with that password, depending on that individual's access, they can get into a lot of information about your company. So the second part is training. I think this is really important too. There are programs that can actually test your company. So they'll send emails with links that look like it's from your company, but it's not. And if they click it, in this case, it's a secure environment. But what you're looking for is habits. And do we have a problem company-wide, or do we just have a problem with a couple of individuals? But I think training is really important, and it's not just like once a year. I think it should be at least some kind of activity once every month, and it doesn't have to be long. It could be like maybe 5 to 10 minutes long, but just something to reinforce the fact that everybody's responsible and that they play an important role in keeping your data and your company safe. So lastly, here, don't go it alone. You have access to advisors in different areas, whether it's legal counsel, whether it's a technology advisor. All of these people, you have support from law enforcement in the event that you do get breached. It's important that you know you have all these resources, and all of these resources should be working together to help you in the event of a breach, or more importantly, to prevent them. So keep that in mind. And we'll just run through, I think I've already talked about this, but access to your servers and the server room should be limited. It should really be on a as-needed basis. Either you're the IT person or you're the manager / owner. But if you had an office of 10 people, it's very unlikely that all 10 people need access to that server room. It's just another form of security, and it's one that a lot of people don't think about. But physical security is a huge piece. I've been in offices where we've actually deactivated all the disk drives and all the USB ports to prevent people from potentially sticking in a flash drive and copying sensitive data and taking it with them. So there are, you can go to that extreme. You don't necessarily have to, but that's something to consider. Go ahead, Brian. This is a key one too, and depending on what you deal with or the size of your company, this is going to mean different things to different groups of people. So it's really important to understand what regulations that you have an obligation to. There are a lot of things, if you have a large number of employees, or even at least one, and you have their records, you do have some form of HIPAA compliance. There are tools that will help you stay in compliance and keep that data safe. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about how to set up a secure environment, that if you do have a regulation or sets of regulations that you need to be mindful of, you want to look at those requirements and make sure you go above the minimum standards. Document all incidents and be prepared. I can't tell you how important that is, and all of that starts with a plan. Again, we talked earlier about planning ahead, and that's really important. That will also help you coordinate not only your defenses but your responses to would-be attackers. Next slide. And these are just some types of incident examples. If you haven't ever heard of hacktivism before, hacktivism is hackers with some kind of social or political cause. Maybe they'll they'll go after the U.S. Treasury Department just to show that they can get in there, and they're trying to make a statement to the government. Maybe I don't think any of the people on this call might be affected, but if you were in a highly controversial business, you might be a subject of hacktivism. So that's one thing to look out for. Of all these things, I will tell you that 70% of all the attacks still generate from some type of phishing scheme, so an email or a letter sent. The reason why that number is so high is because they still work. So some Chinese hackers were interviewed once, and they said, why do you still send phishing emails? And they said, because they still work. If we send 3,000 emails or emails to 3,000 people in a company, we know that a certain percentage of them are going to open those emails and give us access to what we want. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Sometimes the worst attack is the simplest. And Crypto Locker, if you've heard of that, they're actually copying all your files and deleting all your originals. The new files are all encrypted, and then they're asking you to pay a ransom to unencrypt those files so you can actually do business again. If you have certain backups in place, you can actually just revert back to the latest copy and not have to pay those guys at all. So those are the little things to keep in mind. Okay. Go ahead, Brian. Okay, so in the event that you're breached, you want to make your best effort to understand what's been impacted, and if you can't determine that, you want to start making those calls to a legal counsel, to law enforcement, and at least make them aware that you think there might be a breach. Oftentimes, the problem with small businesses, and even large businesses just like Yahoo, you heard about their breaches last year. They were actually hacked in 2014. So there's a number out there that floats between 4 to 18 months before, on average, that a business has been breached before they actually know they've been breached. And you can lose a lot of information, if not all of it, in any amount of time, even shorter than those 4 months. So just something to keep in mind. Remember to when we talk about defending, we usually talk about keeping people out, but you also want to have some kind of process that looks for threats inside. So it's great to have like a security system for your house that will let you know if somebody broke through the door. But what if somebody came in and left a camera inside, or left a recorder inside? If you're not constantly looking around your house every so often, you might not find that stuff, and people are just sucking information out of your house, or in this case, out of your business. That's just a little analogy of how to think about it. But you want to keep them out, but you also want to have a process that looks internally through your network to find any issues or inconsistent activity is really how we discover that. Okay, Brian, next. So, again, this talks about average time under attack. It's 18 months before detection. IT systems access or malware activity. Again, we talked a few slides ago, we talked about creating a baseline. One of the things that we can do as well is create a baseline for your network activity, and we can run that against current activity, and we can determine if there's been changes. And if there's been changes, we have to figure out why. It may be valid reasons, but let's say we see information being sent to a certain IP address that has nothing to do with your company, and it might even be in another country. Obviously that's a huge red flag. So those are the things that we'd be looking for, and those are indicators that you might have a problem. Also, if you are starting to see that you don't have access to certain files or certain information has been deleted or moved, that's also an indicator for you to be aware of. Okay, Brian. And then, obviously, if you suspect a data breach, you want to contact a cybersecurity specialist. Hopefully this is somebody like your trusted technical advisor. If not, it's actually somebody who you call that advisor, and he would bring you the cybersecurity specialist if they don't have that knowledge in-house. But hopefully you've made these contacts ahead of time and you have this all planned out. So this is just a simple phone call, as opposed to having to search or find out who you should talk to about this. Again, your advisor will probably help you and determine whether or not you need to elevate that to legal counsel and law enforcement, but it's never a bad idea to even drop a line to those people as well, let them know that you're looking into something. Okay, Brian. And I guess I'm jumping ahead of myself because I'm actually answering questions here before we even got into the slide. But again, as I had said before, whether or not to contact law enforcement will probably be handled by your cybersecurity advisor, but it's never a bad idea to contact them anyways. If you weren't aware, some of these breaches, especially credit card breaches, are actually handled by Secret Service. So that's a fun thing to deal with if you've never had to deal with that before, and hopefully you never will. But it's interesting to see which agencies get involved depending on the type of information that's been compromised. Okay, Brian. So again, there are a lot of different solutions offered by many different companies. Microsoft does have an add-on set of bundle of programs called EMS, which stands for Enterprise Mobility and Security. This is something that gets attached to Office 365 accounts. It helps with everything that we've talked about, data loss prevention, encrypting sensitive data. It helps with regulatory compliance, and it actually helps control access not only internally but externally. If you send documents externally, you can determine who has access for how long, and if you decide that you no longer want them to have access, you can actually rescind that access at any time. So even if it looks like it's in their inbox, if they go to open it and you've rescinded that access, they don't have any opportunity to get that information anymore. It's really powerful, and one of the greatest examples there is, let's say you're doing bids and you send a bid out for review, and you have a feeling that that bid might be, somebody might be shopping your bid out somewhere else. If you want to turn that off, you can actually turn access to that bid off, and it's like they never even got it. You can lock your files down so much that the only way they can make a copy of it is that they actually took the camera on their phone and took a picture of their screen, because you can set it to not be editable. They can't download it. They can't even save it to their own computer or forward that link to somebody else. All they can do is open it and view it and then close it. That's all they can do. So a lot of powerful tools out there, and depending on your company's needs, everybody might need a little something different or choose to implement in a different way, and that's all based upon how your company operates, and your trusted advisor should be able to sit down and walk through that process with you and help you make the right decisions. Brian? Okay, so just kind of quickly review all this, and again, I appreciate your time and patience through our little technical issue there, but based on our talk today, we all know that cybersecurity is concerned for all businesses and all employees within each business. So this isn't something that one person can tackle. You have to tackle as a company, and that requires training and constant communication. Whether you think you have information that's of value to somebody or not, your machines themselves can be used in the perpetration of another cybercrime. So remember that small businesses are very much prime targets for large attacks. Obligations to confidentiality, integrity, and availability, as well as to regulatory compliance. Those are 4 important things to remember here. And planning to make your employees aware. Again, we've talked about the importance of communication, training, and I think employees really respond to the task. So if you don't include them, then they're going to do what they do. But if you include them in the process, remind them how important it is and how important that data and the security of your information in your company is to their livelihood, because as long as your business is in business, they can continue to have a job and make money, and that's important to everybody. And then lastly, develop those third-party relationships, either with a technical advisor, legal counsel, and even I would even start making contacts with your local law enforcement and ask them how they respond to attacks, or if they have any tips for you as a small business on on what's going on, if they have any information that they can share with you. Maybe they're aware of certain attacks in your area, and that's something they can disseminate to you. All of this is important information, and then what you do with it is even more important. So if you make those connections with your local law enforcement and they give you some information, share it with your entire company. Make sure that everybody knows so that everybody can be watchful and mindful of what they're doing online and at home should they have access to information at their homes. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it back to Brian.
Eddie, thank you. That was terrific. We are going to switch to a panel discussion, and I wanted to just point out the email address there, slides@ssgnet.com. So if you would go ahead and send a bit of email to that email address and kind of mention cybersecurity somewhere in the subject line or in the body of the email message, we'll send back out to you a copy of today's slides in PDF format. What I want to do also is to mention a free gift. So maybe at the conclusion of our presentation here, there's a free gift that Eddie would like to present. And what I'll do is maybe let him describe that toward the end of our presentation. Dave McCormick submitted a couple of questions, and if you don't mind, Dave, I'm going to answer the second one first, or bring that one up first. And you asked the question, is there something that I should do to my computer every day, like shut down using a function key, run a virus check, etc.? So Eddie, go ahead and see what you can do with that question.
Excuse me, sure thing. What I like to do is I have, excuse me, my voice is going here. What I like to do is I have an antivirus installed on my machine. So it's going to run its periodic checks, and I have that set up to do it automatically during off hours. But there are times, let's say, when there's been a lot of activity, I'll actually have it, and usually those scans are looking for key things. So it's not doing a complete scan of your system, but it's doing the critical areas. So that should be going on every day. In my opinion, that should be going on every day. And then I do a complete scan of my system probably 2 to 3 times a week. So maybe like a Wednesday and a Friday. I'm usually working on the weekend, so I probably do one on the weekend as well. But that's always good. Just a little tip as far as entering passwords and things like that. I use a virtual keyboard to enter passwords instead of my actual keyboard. That way, there's a lot of malware that actually logs keystrokes, so you can prevent, if you don't have any keystrokes, there's nothing for them to log and nothing for them to steal. And there's also other password managers that you can use that don't require you to actually type in a password. So those are a couple of things that I would do.
Great. Let me go on to a question that I had jotted down, and I think you touched on this a little bit earlier. The question was about ransomware. And ransomware is just a really common thing, so I bumped into it even in, there was a Printing Industry Association's event that I attended where a conversation came up about ransomware. So just to reiterate, Eddie, what can someone do to prevent or forestall ransomware?
Okay, well, this is probably, it's a great question, and this is probably the best reason to plan ahead and have things in advance of an attack, because ransomware, once it's happened, unless you put the processes in place already, you pretty much have to pay the ransom or start from scratch. Both are costly. I would say the ransoms are usually less expensive. I went to an FBI seminar end of last year, and they were talking about ransomware and CryptoLocker and things like that. And their recommendations to small businesses were to just pay the fine, because if you don't, you're never going to get access to that information again. And unfortunately, these hackers, they run this like a business. So they have a vested interest in giving you the encryption keys to get your information back so that people continue to pay. So on the bright side of the bad side, if you do pay, there's probably 99.9% chance you'll get access to everything that you didn't have access to. On the downside is you have to pay that ransom. So one of the things I would recommend is something called an image-based backup. An image-based backup is different from a file-based backup in a sense of an image consists of the operating system, all the applications, along with the files that you have in your network or on your endpoints. And what that does is that if you just do a file backup, sure, you have files, and that's great. You can use those, but if you go, again, we're going to refer to that bare metal restore. If I have a computer that doesn't have any of the information that I'm used to using, then all I have is the files, but I have no application to open it. If you do an image-based setup, once you restore that image, then you can use it as if that was the same computer that you were using the day before. One of the things I recommend also is to do intraday backups. So let's say I'll do a backup at noon when everybody's at lunch, and then I'll do another one at like 5:30 or 6 after everybody's gone for the day. So let's say I get hacked, I get my crypto locker at, I don't know, and it doesn't happen this fast, but I'm going to give you this example. Let's say it happens at 1:30, and then we realize we've been hacked. I can go back to my most recent copy, which took place at noon. I can restore from that copy, and I've only lost information from noon till whenever we realized we got hacked. So maybe an hour and a half's worth of work. And if it's at 1:30, hopefully most of my group was at lunch from 12 to 1, so maybe we're looking at about half an hour. The reality of the situation is those kinds of attacks don't usually happen that quickly. They get in, they do some work, and then maybe a week or two later, you start getting that message. But when you have the image-based backup, you protect yourself and you minimize the loss. So in this case, you may lose like a week or two worth of work, but you don't have to pay the fine, and you can get your business back up and running immediately. There's no transaction time involved, except for the restore process, which can be anywhere from half an hour to 45 minutes if you have the right setup.
Great, thank you.
Well,
I have, maybe it's time for one last question. And I was thinking about some of the places that we've been to, Eddie, where fire, flood, and theft come up in discussion. In certain situations, many customers or people that we've seen have everything in one spot. How do people address that, or how should they address that?
Okay, that's another excellent question. I'm glad you're asking these things. Oftentimes I'll come across business owners or managers that say, yes, we do backups frequently, and then I ask them where they keep their backup, and it's usually in the drawer of the desk that the computer that they just backed up is sitting on. So now in the case of like you being hacked, that might be fine, but let's say there was a fire or a flood or some natural disaster that Ryan was referring to. Whatever took out your main computer is probably going to take out the backup that's sitting right next to it. So it's really important to have a plan. You can use cloud services, which are much more reliable and much more secure than they've ever been before. With cloud services, as backups, you have redundancy and co-location. If you're not familiar with what co-location means, it means your data resides in more than one data center. So let's say there's 3 data centers across the U.S., one on the West Coast, one in the Midwest, one on the East Coast. Your information resides in all 3, so that at any given time, if 1 or 2 of those data centers were to be compromised or go down for some reason, you still have your data in one of the other ones. And that's the whole idea behind using cloud services, redundancy, and co-location. If you choose that that's not the right option for you, then you can use a flash drive or an external hard drive to copy your data. but just make sure that you take that and you put it someplace else. If you're going to do your backups once a week or daily, just make sure you take that and either the manager or the owner takes that home, or you put it in a safe deposit box or a fireproof safe somewhere other than where your main systems are, to ensure that whatever may affect those won't affect your backups. And then finally, there's hybrid solutions that actually have a device that connect to your machine and to the cloud. So you store a local copy to that device. It's also backed up in the cloud. And in the event that your systems, maybe it's just a computer or a server that got hacked, you can actually run everything off of that external device as if you had a new server up and running. It's really amazing. Those type of solutions tend to be a little bit more expensive, but depending on your tolerance to data loss and being out of business, they're worth it. And remember, all of this is kind of like insurance against what could happen. So it depends on your budget and how exposed you're willing to be.
Okay, why don't we go to our last bit of information. We will also, since we're part of this Microsoft Community Connections program, we have the ability to give away licenses to Office 365 as a raffle prize. So if you go through the process, as we described earlier, send a piece of email to slides@ssgnet.com. We will send you a copy of the presentation in PDF format, and we will draw the winner of the raffle prize from those who submit. And then I wanted to just kind of go through a little bit of last final thoughts. And maybe Eddie can go first and maybe describe that free gift, and I'll explain why I didn't answer Dave McCormick's initial question.
Well,
Don't have to.
The free gift is really, it's just a quick little checklist of 5 things just to get you started on your path to being more secure. So if you send your email in, we'll just send you a little deck, and it's basically one slide that has 5 things that I think that are a low-hanging fruit that you can get started on right now to make your environment more secure. So it's just a little handout for you. And again, please feel free to contact us if you have any questions about this stuff. We'd love to help you. And through the Microsoft Community Connections, that's really our goal, is to extend our knowledge out to the community, out to the business community, and help you stay in business. That's what we really want to do, and see you grow. That's what we'd love to do.
Very good. And then for me, final thought is just thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. And then if Dave has any final comments?
Yes, I have a final comment. Thank you, Brian and Ed, Eddie, for your presentation. I definitely learned. I didn't know about an image backup. That's and the information for EMS is another thing that's new for me. We're going to have webinars here for the next 11 months. Our next one's going to be on customer relationship management, CRM. Learn about how to acquire and retain customers through reputation sales and marketing activities. So hope to see you at those. And thank you for attending, and we'll be in touch. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.